And they will become really, frankly, bit part players. Now, they won't like that. And that's probably what this is all about, making sure they've got a presence.
It began, as these things so often do in the age of memes, not with a scandal, but with a spoon. Not with a PR rollout, but with a chuckle. And not with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex carefully orchestrating another round of glossy brand extensions, but with David Beckham standing in his kitchen laughing at a jar of plum jam. And in that single moment, with Victoria Beckham casually filming her husband as he labeled jars David Beck Jam, with nothing more than a label maker and a smirk, something seismic shifted in the world of celebrity branding. Something that hit Meghan Markle's carefully curated empire like a wrecking ball through a glass conservatory. Because Meghan had spent years trying to build a lifestyle brand in the shadow of Goop, a brand that demanded to be taken seriously. A brand that staged jars of jam not as fruit preserves, but as status symbols, as quiet luxury in a jar, as if each spoonful carried with it the weight of royal history and Hollywood ambition. She had jars photographed with dried flowers sprinkled around them, styled as though they belonged not in a pantry, but on the cover of Architectural Digest. She leaked stories of gifting them to Serena Williams and Abigail Spencer, as if conferring relics upon her inner circle. Every gesture was meant to scream exclusivity, refinement, gravitas. And then came Beckham, with none of the consultants, none of the PR muscle, none of the Netflix tie-ins. Just fruit from a backyard tree, a chuckle at his wife's suggestion he was an entrepreneur, and the silly, self-aware pun, Beck Jam. In a world choking on overproduction, Beckham's jars felt like a breath of fresh air. He wasn't selling them. He wasn't monetizing them. He wasn't even trying. And that, precisely, is why people fell in love. The internet lit up in minutes. One Twitter user wrote, "Meghan tried to out-goop Gwyneth. Beckham just out-jammed Meghan with one pun." 40,000 likes in an afternoon. Another posted a side-by-side of Meghan's pristine jars with carefully arranged herbs against Beckham's scribbled labels and wrote, "One's curated, one's cultured." TikTok took it further, splicing clips of Beckham's shrugging refusal to commercialize with footage of Meghan's stylized rollout, captioned, "One made jam, one made homework." Within hours, the narrative wasn't simply about jam. It was about authenticity versus artificiality, charm versus calculation, and banter versus branding. And in that court, banter won. Suddenly, Beckham wasn't just a football legend or a global icon. He was the cultural foil Meghan Markle had never wanted, but now couldn't escape. What made the sting sharper was that Meghan's entire post-royal identity rested on the promise of lifestyle credibility. From Netflix specials to Spotify podcasts to orchestrated magazine covers, everything was staged to sell an image of curated intimacy, of a woman who could turn personal taste into global influence. But taste, as critics quickly noted, cannot be forced. Charm cannot be manufactured. Authenticity isn't a campaign. And so when Beckham's jars went viral precisely because he refused to brand them, Meghan's efforts looked not high-end, but hollow. The Telegraph dubbed Beckham the most authentic influencer alive. The Guardian ran a headline calling Beck Jam the cultural moment Meghan Markle didn't want. And if the broadsheets were laughing, you can imagine what the tabloids did. They crowned him the new Jam King of England, a man who managed to outshine Montecito's million-dollar PR machine with nothing but plums and a pun. And here's where Harry entered the picture, dragged into the fallout whether he liked it or not. Because Meghan's failure was never going to be just Meghan's. The Sussex brand is a two-headed operation, one in which Harry's role is to provide the royal proximity while Meghan builds the lifestyle empire. If the empire collapses, his relevance collapses too. For years, whispers circled that Harry feared becoming irrelevant by his 50s, a man, once known as a prince, reduced to a gentleman formerly known as Prince, as one commentator cruelly quipped. The jam debacle only accelerated that trajectory. Because if your wife's jars can be dethroned by Beckham's banter, what's left of your royal aura? On X, memes mocked Harry as the man who couldn't even be the king of his own kitchen. One viral post paired footage of him juggling in a Netflix documentary with Beckham's jam jars and captioned, one's circus, one's substance. Others called him Harold the Hapless, a sidekick watching his brand evaporate in real time. For a man already mocked for storming out of Clarence house after a 20-minute tea, being overshadowed by jam was salt in the wound. The cruelty of the comparison was in its simplicity. Meghan tried to elevate jam into a business plan, a cultural symbol, something aspirational. Beckham made jam into a family joke and won the internet. Meghan demanded to be taken seriously. Beckham refused and became beloved. Meghan's jars were artifacts of effort. Beckham's were artifacts of ease. And in the age of social media, where the public can sniff out overproduction in seconds, ease will always beat effort. Branding analyst Amanda Lockwood told Variety, "You can't manufacture charm." And Beckham has it in spades. Meghan tried to sell jam as status. Beckham sold nothing and gained everything. That critique stung because it revealed the deeper truth. Meghan's empire depended on people believing. Beckham's joke revealed maybe they never really did. Behind the scenes, reports suggested Montecito was in panic mode. Page 6 hinted that Meghan's PR advisors flagged Beck Jam as a reputational threat. The concern wasn't market share, Beckham wasn't selling anything, but narrative. His casual authenticity exposed her artificiality. He turned what she wanted to be aspirational into something faintly ridiculous. And when memes, late-night jokes, and mainstream headlines pile up, they calcify into cultural shorthand. Meghan's jars became symbols not of quiet luxury but of trying too hard. And once that perception sticks, no PR rollout can undo it. Sources close to her hinted she found the comparisons unfair, trivializing, even cruel. But cruelty is the language of the internet, and in that language, Beckham had already won. Meanwhile, Beckham leaned further into the authenticity that made him untouchable. When fans urged him to monetize Beck Jam, he laughed and said, "No chance. It's just for us." That offhand dismissal wasn't a strategy, but it became one. Because refusing to capitalize only deepened the contrast. Meghan turned jam into business. Beckham turned jam into family. Meghan turned jam into a metaphor for status. Beckham turned jam into a Sunday laugh. The optics could not be harsher. The more she tried to curate, the more desperate she looked. The more he shrugged, the more adored he became. In a cruel twist of irony, Meghan spent millions to chase what Beckham stumbled into by accident: credibility. And Harry, always in the background, became collateral damage. If Meghan's empire was mocked, so too was the Sussex Project. Commentators began whispering, how many more deals can they ink if every cultural rollout ends in memes? Netflix executives, already rumored to be cringing at Clarence House tea optics, surely noticed that even jam now backfired. Fans joked about a future docuseries titled Jamgate, Season 3 denied by Dad. On TikTok, clips of Harry's tense exit from Clarence House were mashed up with Beckham's jam video, captioned, "One left empty-handed, one left with jam." The narrative metastasized. Harry wasn't just a prince out of moves, he was a man whose brand collapsed in the shadow of plum preserves, and the cultural consequences stretched further still. For Meghan, the jam debacle wasn't just about losing ground to Beckham. It was about losing control of the narrative. Once mainstream outlets reframed Beckham as the authentic lifestyle king, her empire looked not just shaky but untenable. For Harry, it accelerated the fear he'd always harbored: irrelevance. Commentators compared him to a contestant on Love Island dumped in week 1, to Kendall Roy in Succession begging for validation and getting none. The mockery wasn't subtle, it was brutal. And memes, once they take root, rarely fade. They calcify into shorthand, they stick like jam on toast. So how did one jar dethrone a duchess? How did one pun eclipse an empire? Because in the end, culture rewards ease over effort, charm over calculation, banter over branding. Meghan's jam was homework. Beckham's jam was brunch. Meghan demanded reverence. Beckham invited laughter. And Harry, forever the sidekick, found himself mocked as the man who couldn't even compete in his own kitchen. The Sussexes wanted to be cultural royalty. Instead, they became bit players in the Beck Jam show. And if that feels cruel, it's because cruelty is the internet's crown. It's because cruelty is the internet's crown. The story of Meghan Markle's jam jars was never really about jam. It was about image, power, and the absurdity of modern celebrity branding colliding head-on with a culture that has grown allergic to artifice. Meghan, in her Montecito bubble, thought she could bottle prestige and dignity in a jar, slap a label on it, and sell it as if it were nobility spooned straight from Buckingham Palace. Each jar of her as-ever preserves was framed as an extension of her identity. Curated, staged, photographed with dried flowers sprinkled around it like some sacred artifact. This wasn't food, it was theater. It was branding. It was a duchess trying to be a lifestyle empress. And then, out of nowhere, David Beckham, the man once mocked for his voice, once typecast as a beautiful but dim footballer, strolled into the kitchen with a plum tree, a label maker, and the kind of irony no PR consultant could script. He slapped David Beck jam on a jar, chuckled as Victoria filmed him, and with one pun, one shrug, and one spoonful, he dethroned Meghan Markle's entire empire. What Meghan spent months plotting, Beckham toppled in a weekend, and the internet crowned him king before she even had time to say quiet luxury. This was more than a meme. It was a cultural coup, because Meghan had made the fatal mistake of believing her audience still wanted to be lectured. Her jam wasn't jam, it was an essay in a jar. It had footnotes. It demanded reverence. When she supposedly sent jars to Serena Williams and Abigail Spencer, the gesture was presented not as a friend sharing fruit, but as if the Magna Carta itself had been bestowed. Everything about it screamed effort, desperation. "Look at me," it pleaded. "Look at how refined I am. Look at how curated my kitchen is. Look at how noble I still remain." And that, in the savage economy of attention, is death. Because Beckham didn't even try. He laughed. He said, "I'm not an entrepreneur," when Victoria teased him. He spooned jam like a dad mucking about on a Sunday morning. He refused to monetize. And precisely because he refused to care, the world decided he was authentic. Meghan was performing royalty. Beckham was playing with plums. And authenticity always beats performance. Always. Harry, of course, got pulled into the humiliation. He had once worried, reports say, that he'd be irrelevant in his 50s. A bald ex-prince, the artist formerly known as Royal. But thanks to Meghan's overcooked jam brand, he didn't have to wait that long. Irrelevance arrived early. Harry became the sidekick to the world's most mocked fruit preserves. While David Beckham, his supposed friend, his supposed ally in the cultural hierarchy, became the jam king, Harry was reduced to background noise. The man holding the spoon while Meghan staged her floral displays. On TikTok, users mocked him relentlessly. One viral clip spliced footage of Beckham laughing with Victoria next to Harry awkwardly sitting beside Meghan in her Netflix series, captioned, "One's laughing at jam, the other's stuck in one." Another user wrote bluntly, "Beckham got the culture, Harry got the bill." In a single meme, the prince was reduced to a punchline. And oh, the memes. They were merciless. Twitter users crowned Beckham the King of England we actually wanted. Reddit threads asked the brutal question, if Meghan can't make jam feel real, how can she make anything feel real? TikTok audio remixes cut between Meghan's PR photos and Beckham's chuckles, labeling them PR versus plum reality. The soundbite of him saying, "I'm not an entrepreneur," became a meme template used to roast every influencer who tried too hard. Late-night shows couldn't resist. The Late Show joked that Beckham had finally beaten royalty, not on the football pitch but in the jam aisle. Saturday Night Live writers sketched a parody where a fake Meghan solemnly handed jars to celebrities as if delivering state secrets. Every corner of the internet had the same conclusion. Meghan's empire wasn't dignified. It was ridiculous. And Beckham's plum pun had exposed it all. But here's the cruel genius of it. Beckham didn't just out-jam Meghan. He out-narrated her. Because in the economy of modern celebrity, the product is secondary. What matters is the story. Meghan's story was one of effort. She had tried to out-goop Gwyneth, to out-curate Martha Stewart, to out-royalize the royals themselves. Every move was staged, photographed, marketed. Her jars were lined with dried petals, her labels polished, her gifting campaigns choreographed. It screamed seriousness, but Beckham's story was that he didn't care. He had a plum tree. He made some jam. He made a pun. He laughed at himself. He refused to sell it, and that story, casual, humorous, authentic, was priceless. It was what marketers dream of. It was the kind of narrative money can't buy. Meghan tried to turn jam into a status symbol. Beckham turned jam into a joke, and people loved him for it. The fallout was swift and brutal. Meghan's jars began appearing on resale sites for absurd prices. $200 for jam that was supposed to represent quiet luxury. Buyers weren't treating it like food. They were treating it like a parody collectible, a meme preserved in glass. In contrast, Beckham's jars were unavailable. Not for sale, not a business, just a family project. And that absence, that refusal to commercialize, made them more valuable than any luxury price tag Meghan could dream up. The irony was savage. Meghan's exclusivity looked desperate, contrived. Beckham's unavailability looked genuine. And in the marketplace of public opinion, authenticity is the only currency that counts. Even Hollywood insiders couldn't ignore the humiliation. Deadline reported whispers among Meghan's backers that her brand instincts were out of sync with the times. Variety quoted producers who admitted that being upstaged by a footballer's weekend hobby was a PR disaster no strategy could spin. Page 6 insiders revealed that Meghan's team flagged Beck Jam as a reputational threat, not because he was competing, but because he was exposing the artificiality of her entire project. Beckham wasn't selling jam. He was selling himself, unintentionally, as the embodiment of what Meghan could never master. Not caring. The Guardian summed it up perfectly. David Beckham has discovered the one luxury Meghan Markle hasn't mastered: not caring. That was the knife twist. Meghan, for all her speeches about authenticity, couldn't fake it. Beckham didn't even try. And the world loved him more. Harry's humiliation deepened as the saga spread. For a man who had once positioned himself as Diana's heir, a global humanitarian, a voice for veterans, to be dragged into memes about jam was almost Shakespearean in its cruelty. Tabloid headlines mocked him as the man who married into marmalade. One viral tweet joked, "Harry left the monarchy to become the Duke of Dried Flowers." Another wrote, "He gave up titles for jam jars. How's that for destiny?" It was merciless. And yet, Harry seemed powerless to stop it. Because the jam wars weren't really about him. They were about Meghan. And he was trapped in her brand implosion, collateral damage to a cultural coup staged by plums. By the time late-night comedians and BBC radio hosts were laughing about Beckham's kitchen trophies, Meghan's brand had crossed an invisible line. It wasn't aspirational anymore. It was a punchline. Once a brand becomes a punchline, it's almost impossible to recover. Because people aren't just mocking the product. They're mocking the person behind it. And Meghan, who had built her post-royal life around the idea of being taken seriously, suddenly found herself on the wrong side of the joke. Her empire of seriousness, of curated gravitas, had been undercut by a dad joke in a kitchen. It was the ultimate humiliation, and it exposed the hollowness at the core of her brand. Investors took notice. Hollywood executives started whispering, if Meghan couldn't even make jam feel authentic, how could she sell anything else? The Spotify deal had collapsed. The Netflix buzz had dwindled. Her magazine covers were mocked as overproduced. Now even her jam jars were a meme. It wasn't just a bad week, it was a pattern. A pattern of overpromise, underdeliver, and always too much effort. As one Reddit comment put it, if she loses to jam, she loses to everything. Brutal, but accurate. Because the jam wars were never really about preserves. They were about credibility. And Meghan's credibility was evaporating, spoonful by spoonful. Beckham, meanwhile, basked in the glow of unintentional triumph. He hadn't plotted a cultural coup. He hadn't hired PR consultants. He hadn't staged photo shoots. He just made jam. But by laughing at himself, by refusing to commercialize, by letting Victoria film him casually, he embodied what audiences craved: effortlessness. He stumbled into the holy grail of modern branding: unintentional influence. And in doing so, he redefined what celebrity side hustles should look like. Why spend millions on fake authenticity when a pun and a plum tree can win the internet? As one marketing executive told Business Insider, every celebrity with a side hustle is studying Beck Jam right now. If he can win the culture war without selling a jar, why are they burning money on fake authenticity? The lesson was savage, and it left Meghan's empire looking obsolete. For Meghan, the jam wars weren't just embarrassing, they were existential, because her entire brand depended on being taken seriously. She wasn't selling jam. She was selling herself as an aspirational figure, a woman of taste, dignity, gravitas. But when the world laughed at her jam, they weren't just laughing at fruit. They were laughing at her. And that laughter, once it begins, is almost impossible to stop. Because every move she makes now will be judged through the lens of effort versus authenticity. And Beckham's laughter will echo in the background of every jar, every product, every project. He has become her cultural foil, the reminder that charm can't be bought, that authenticity can't be staged, that sometimes the king is crowned not in Buckingham Palace, but in a kitchen with a pun. And so, Meghan Markle, the Duchess who dreamed of being a lifestyle empress, finds herself dethroned not by the Queen, not by the tabloids, not by the firm she fled, but by a footballer with a plum tree. It is almost poetic. The woman who wanted to define taste has been redefined by jam. The man who was once dismissed as shallow is now hailed as authentic. And Harry, the man who gave it all up, is now reduced to the Prince of Preserves, trapped in a narrative he cannot escape. The jam wars will fade eventually. Memes move on, but the cultural memory will linger, because this wasn't just about jam. It was about the collapse of manufactured aspiration in real time. It was about the triumph of banter over branding. And it was about the cruel truth that in the marketplace of public opinion, effort is weakness, authenticity is king, and sometimes the crown belongs not to those who try the hardest, but to those who don't try at all. This is Crown and Controversy, unraveling the royals, one scandal at a time. Don't forget to subscribe.